Okay, so before we start with the video, I need to talk about some artistic liberties I took when it came to creating the loadout. So on screen, you can see this gun configuration. The artist for AR-15 actually created this to showcase what parts they use in making her guns. Now, the most important things are the fact that they're both AR-15s, and the one on the left is actually trimmed in 300 blackout. Now this one becomes an issue. I cannot match the caliber because 300 Blackout is only available on the M13 or alternatively by its real life name, the Sig Sauer MCX. So if I were to actually use 300 Blackout, the gun itself would be entirely different and I could not match the way it looks aesthetically. On the other end, the short barrel AR-15, the one with the integral suppressor, the integral suppressor used for the M4A1 in the game actually has a pretty big issue in that it's way too long to look like the one in the image. So instead I use the Kilo 141, which also has an integrally suppressed barrel, but it also looks way shorter. Another benefit is the only PDW stock in the game is actually also on the Kilo 141. And as you can see, it has a PDW style stock for the gun on the right. So I once again needed to use the Kilo 141 to match it. It's also not going to be 300 blackout, even though you would think it would make sense to be 300 blackout because it's an SBR suppressed, but no, it's 5.56 for some reason. So I at least got the caliber right, but the gun itself is entirely wrong when I'm actually using the secondary short SBR. Okay, so here we are with AR-15's long gun. So you can see it has the tack light barrel, compensator, commando foregrip, variable zoom scope, and the aim down sight stock, which I'm not going to say the full name of because I don't like it. So you may notice there's some things about it that are unusual. Number one, this looks nothing like the normal AR-15, and that's because I'm using a purchasable skin called Zip Tie. This is not from any battle pass, and you can unlock it for free. So unfortunately, you cannot make your gun look like this unless you pay money. But, well, because I wanted to make a video on it, I spent the money anyway. It's only about 800 COD points. So I went with a pretty simple setup over here, just cold-blooded, ghost, and battle-hardened. You're immune to kill streaks that look for you, and stuns and flashes just don't do much against you. It's a pretty general build, so I like it. So now we need to talk about the effectiveness of the gun, and I could go on and on, but let's first clarify what was the M4A1 good at? And I think everyone who plays Modern Warfare 2019 pretty much knows it's good at everything. Kinda doesn't really have any weaknesses. It's a generalist weapon, does well at range, does well at close quarters, does well at mid-range, doesn't have too much recoil, isn't a complete laser though. So we've already established, I think everyone knows that the M4A1's is debatably one of the best weapons of the game alongside the MP5. So now we have to talk about the attachments. Now, we have two recoil attachments here. Recoil stabilization, which the M4 has a little bit of an issue with side-to-side sway and view kick. So of course the commando foregrip gets rid of that, and that one's really good. But we also have kind of what I would consider overkill in the compensator, which reduces the vertical recoil. Now the reason why I'm saying this is overkill is because you have both recoil controlling things on this. So as you can see, shooting with the variable zoom scope, which is like I can shoot at people far away, this thing has very little recoil, almost no view kick because of the commando foregrip, and it doesn't rise too much because of the compensator. So if you really wanted to make a laser, this would be it. It would be good at long range. Unfortunately, the barrel itself does not really combine well with it. The attack light barrel reduces your range by 14% and your bullet velocity by 18%, I think. And it only really decreases your aim down sight time by about 8 milliseconds, which really isn't all that great. You know, like, might as well not use it. 8 milliseconds ain't nothing. So, in a way, this weapon works really well. I mean, you can see in the gameplay, I'm tearing people up at range. However, is it optimal? I would say not at all. So, the reason why I'm saying it's not optimal is because the bullet velocity is lowered and your range is lowered, yet all the attachments are made for lowering the recoil as much as possible, and the scope allows you to engage at far ranges. You could even use it in ground-borne stuff. However, due to the lower range, you're going to take more shots to kill at range, and with the lower bullet velocity, it's going to take more time for your bullets to hit the target. Also, that was a pretty nice-ass pistol kill. Damn dope. So, we also, let's talk about the last two things on here. I mentioned the scope, and there's also the stock. So, like I said, we do have some attachments on here that already reduce the aim down sight time, mostly being the barrel. However, it does almost nothing in comparison to the stock. The stock has like triple the effect. It's ridiculous. But the compensator does slow down your aim down sight speed, and the commando foregrip does not slow down your aim down sight speed, but it does slow down your movement speed and especially your aiming down sight movement speed by a lot. That's really what the downside of the commando foregrip is. You may not notice it, but statistically it's pretty big. It's like 20% both. No, 20%. Well, like maximum like 17.5 to 18% when it comes to aim down sight walking speed, and your normal movement speed is down by like 6 or 7%. It's kind of significant. So normally, as you can see, none of these attachments outside of the compensator, which adds like what, 17 milliseconds to your aim down sight's time, well, that's easily countered by the stock. Now, the big thing here is the variable zoom scope. That one actually adds like a good 60 to 70 milliseconds, which in of itself is kind of insane. You know, that's a whole tenth of a second. Sorry, not a whole tenth of a second. 60 to 70% of a tenth of a second. Yeah, I know statistics, right? But anyway, it does make a significant impact to your aiming down sight ability, which I have to say does combine well with the stock and the barrel. Despite me ranting on the barrel earlier for not really giving you much of an advantage, in this case the barrel does actually help you with the lower aim down sight speed given to you by the variable zoom scope. Now we're going to need to be talking about like what ways would you approach combat with this gun? So even though I told you about the lower bullet velocity and the lower range, it's not like it completely destroys the range or destroys the bullet velocity. You can still shoot people at a decent distance. We're talking 6v6 and 10v10 multiplayer. In terms of 32v32 ground war, I really think you should just use one of the M16 barrel, the Corvus Marksman, because those will give a slap to your bullet velocity, right? Give it some extra kick. Put a cayenne pepper on that. Now, so I also don't play much Ground War, so it's not really much of a point to me talking about, oh, what if you did this in Ground War? Because I'm not a proven Ground War player. You know, you don't tell a Navy SEAL what to do if you're a convenience store worker. I'm not going to tell a Ground War player what to do if I don't play Ground War. So when talking purely from 6v6 and 10v10, there are some things I can tell you. As you can see in the gameplay, it's low recoil, really low recoil. So you can definitely get, it's an anti-sniper weapon, I would say. It works as an anti-sniper weapon, and because of the barrel and the stock, I can actually really run out a sprint and aim down sight fast enough to get other people without having too much of a detriment. The main detriment at close range would actually be the scope itself, because the scope is heavily magnified. So if you aim down sight right up next to somebody, you're really not going to be able to hit them unless you're a god at peripheral vision and flicking your mouse or hitting your controller stick as much as you can. So I would generally advise staying farther in the back. Unfortunately, my gameplay doesn't really show this. I'm looking at long range angles right now, right? But later on during the gameplay, you can see me rushing with this setup because generally I am a rusher in Call of Duty. I don't sit back and do absolutely nothing. I want to shoot enemies. I will go out and find the enemies to shoot. So in a way, this isn't good for my playstyle, but I've actually done this before. One of my favorite attachments to use on the assault rifles is the variable zoom scope, and I will say that is my favorite part of this loadout, by far. The variable zoom scope is so good at killing people at range. I would not recommend the LCAN, the Scout Optic. I would not recommend the VLK, the other Russian optic. If you want to shoot at range, I would recommend the variable zoom scope. And yeah, I understand. Also, once again, here's another good pistol kill. I understand you don't want to have the scope glare, but honestly, if people are going to use tac lasers and you can see them from afar, you know, you might as well go the full way and give yourself the glare from the scope. However, I do understand not wanting to use the scope due to glare, and also I get faked out here by two people. That dude jumped out of here like he was the Kool-Aid man. I can understand not wanting to use the scope because of the glare, but I do think it actually doesn't give your position away as much, because if you notice, you kind of have a giant red name above your character model, and that's just some terrible accuracy for me. I'm surprised it didn't shoot back. Anyway, yeah, you have this giant red thing above your body, so it kind of gives your location away anyway. For the most part, I'd say the tac laser is actually even worse than the scope, because you can actually see the laser even when they're not pointed at you, which is kind of a huge weakness. So overall, I would actually recommend if you have good recoil control and you actually like staying in the back, I would definitely put a variable zoom scope on any of the assault rifles you run, as long as you're running enough recoil stabilization and recoil control. Because, well, let me tell you something. It's gonna suck ass if this thing shakes a lot. If you're gonna use a scope and your gun sways like it's on a boat, well, it's kind of useless because you can't hit things at long range if your damn gun is shaking too much. So, as a caveat, you're definitely going to have to put on some recoil controls, some recoil stabilization attachments. But overall, I've been talking about the variable zoom scope, but as you can see, the commando foregrip and the compensator actually complement the variable zoom scope. Should I just call it a scope? No, this is a sniper scope. So yeah, since it complements it so well in this, I can see people from afar and just I'm snapping my fingers. I have RTX voice on, but it just sort of blasts them away. So if they miss their initial shot, you're definitely going to be the one to take them out, because this thing with low enough recoil won't get anyone. This I thought he was tricky, so I shot him through anyway. So overall, would I recommend this setup? Yes, but with one difference. I would actually change the barrel to be the Corvus Marksman barrel or the M16 barrel, because it's kind of counterintuitive to have a barrel that makes it worse at range when every other attachment on the gun is dedicated to making it better at range, minus the aim out sight stock. But honestly, the aiming stability isn't all that bad. So this one's pretty simple and straightforward. It's meant to be an SBR kilo, so really you're just going to be using the integrally suppressed barrel, the tactical foregrip, sleight of hand, but I do change that later, the PDW stock, and the aim point micro. Here's how it pretty much looks. It's a very normal looking firearm. It doesn't look very exotic. It's pretty plain actually, but hey, it works. As for the perks, we have VOD, Battle Hardened, and Hardline. Who's ready for me to talk for a long period of time again, because this is my first time doing a voiceover over pre-recorded gameplay. Anyway, so trying to explain this weapon is going to be really simple because, well, what do you have? You have the Kilo 141, which is sort of like the M4A1 in the way that it's a generalist rifle. It does actually have less vertical recoil, but I would say it has an issue with the recoil stabilization, something that this setup actually does not do at all. There's not a single attachment on this kit that actually reduces the recoil in any way, shape, or form. Not recoil control, not recoil stabilization. The only thing it changes on here is actually aiming stability, which is idle sway, which is different than recoil. So, let's talk about the optic. The optic is the Aimpoint Micro T1, T2. I don't actually know the difference, but it's a standard optic. Pretty much everyone knows what this does. There's nothing special about it. It's not a scope with lots of range. It's a 1x magnification optic with its own unique shroud and its unique red dot. So there's not really much to say other than it helps your peripheral vision. Now, probably the most interesting part about this kit would be the Singard Arms Whisper, and also that was a dope shot. Anyway, talking about the Whisper barrel. That Whisper barrel is integrally suppressed. Now, I didn't actually mention this before, but integrally suppressed barrels actually have a benefit. So you may wonder, okay, we can put a monolithic suppressor on there to increase the range and the bullet velocity. No one ever uses a lightweight suppressor, and neither should you. And a tactical suppressor is essentially putting on a suppressor with no downsides other than just a little bit more aim down sight time. Now, what about these integrally suppressed barrels? Some of them, like the ones for the MP5, well, they make it so when you kill enemies, there's no skull. You don't really see them. Like, oh, hey, my teammate died, and you can see his skull? Yeah, that doesn't exist when you're using that barrel. Now, there is one benefit to integrally suppressed barrels that they do not tell you about, and that is there are no tracers. When you're using a gun without a suppressor, they can see the tracers if you're firing past them. If you are using a gun with a muzzle suppressor, they can see the tracers. But if you are using a barrel attachment that is a suppressor, they do not see the tracers. So in a way, as a stealth attachment, the integrally suppressed barrels are actually superior for keeping you and your location away from the enemy. It also helps that for the most part, integrally suppressed barrels don't really have any downsides other than a little bit lower aim down sight time, or in the case of some others, it's an opposite. You have a faster aim down sight time, but with lower bullet velocity or lower range. But let's not talk about those, we'll talk about this. In this case, it's a slight aim down sight speed increase, however you even get higher bullet velocity alongside your no tracers and suppressed audio. So overall this is a very good barrel. It doesn't do anything for your recoil control though. The other two barrel options give you higher recoil control. This one helps out your range, just like all three. In fact, the Kilo cannot be made to have less range unless you use a lightweight suppressor, but let's not talk about the lightweight suppressor because it is awful. So we've gone through the benefits of the integrally suppressed barrel. I'm not using a magazine upgrade because her gun doesn't have a magazine upgrade, and the PDW stock functions identically to the other aim down sight stocks. So if you remember the AR-15, the long one I just showed previously, that one had an aim down sight stock. Well, you see that one works here too, except, well, it probably helps even more in this case because I'm actually using a barrel that decreases the aim down sight time rather than a barrel that decreases the aim down sight time. I might have said decrease twice. Sorry, what I meant, the M4A1 decreases aim down sight time, and the Kilo 141 suppressed barrel increases aim down sight time. I just spent 20 seconds on that. That was a stupid semantic. But it also decreases your aiming stability. Now this is probably where the most controversial part of this kit comes from, the tactical foregrip. Now, I'm not here to bullshit you. I'm fairly sure the tactical foregrip is an awful attachment. And not because it doesn't do anything, but because the commando foregrip exists. Now, if you don't know what the tactical foregrip does, it just reduces your idle sway. That is it. Now, you may be wondering that's not bad, right? However, it comes with the same downsides, albeit to a lesser extent, of the commando foregrip. So the commando foregrip actually causes you to move slower and aim down sight strafe slower. I've told you this earlier, however the tactical foregrip does that as well. It doesn't do it as badly, but it still happens. So, because it still happens, you're still slowing yourself down, and you might as well go the full way in order to obtain the recoil stabilization that the commando grip affords you, because then you'll have lower recoil, and the downsides will only be a little bit worse. However, due to the stock having aiming stability, you might as well restore some of it using a tactical foregrip. Now, if you remember the image, she actually had this small little foregrip there alongside the tactical foregrip. Now, the reason why I'm not using the operator foregrip is because, honestly, you know what a foregrip does. It reduces recoil. And also, a lot of people run foregrips. I might as well make this thing look a little more exotic, a little more tactical by giving it a tactical foregrip. Anyway, as for the last attachment, I'm using sleight of hand, and well, you know it increases reload speed, but here's a little interesting fact about the Kilo 141 that not many people know. The base reload speed for the Kilo 141 is actually really fast, and the benefit you see from using sleight of hand is reduced compared to most other weapons. Like you'll see maybe like, oh, minus 8 seconds, or minus 0.8 seconds for your reload, or minus 0.6 seconds. It's not too much for the Kilo because its base reload speed is actually already pretty fast. It's the same thing with the AK-47, but we're not talking about the AK-47, we're talking about the Kilo. So how do these attachments really affect the way you play with the Kilo, especially because the Kilo is such a well-rounded generalist weapon? Now, the most important part here, as I mentioned before, is the integrally suppressed barrel. Because of this and the lack of tracers, you can actually engage at farther range due to the increased bullet velocity, but that's not as important because you're using a 1x optic. So, because you are using the integrally suppressed barrel, you can flank a bit better. If you miss your shots and you're behind them, they're not going to instantly know where you're shooting from. They're just going to hear the shots. There aren't going to be any tracers, as I've mentioned. And as for the tactical foregrip, due to increasing your aiming stability, you can see at longer ranges, or at least you can hold your gun at longer ranges and it won't sway nearly as much, which is a benefit. And because of your CQC stock, aka your aiming down sight speed increase stock, you can rush up to people faster and aim down your sights real fast and just kind of shoot them. Shoot them real fast. It's not like you're using a gun with such a low aim down sight speed that you won't be able to come in really fast. Anyway, so about once again, going back to the general topic of what this gun is used for. As you can see, I'm holding it along sight line, or at least I try to use it at long sight lines. Maybe the audio desynced again. But This gun, you want to use it in a flanking maneuver because of its low aim down sight speed, increasing optics. This thing actually runs really fast. Personally, I would actually replace the sleight of hand perk with the stipple grip tape, because I've mentioned that the sleight of hand actually doesn't increase your reload speed by that much because the Kilo has such a nice base reload speed. So you really want to lower down your sprint out times and then make it so that you can sprint in and out of places faster, and you can really react faster. You can get on target faster, which is really important when you're using a rushing class, which is why a lot of people use stipple grip tape on pretty much everything. I have to agree with that notion. Stipple grip tape is pretty great. So what I'm getting at here is that in comparison to the AR-15's long gun, where you hold it at long range, you shoot them from afar, super low recoil, this one has a lot more kick because the Kilo has some serious recoil stabilization issues. Sorry, not serious. The one with the most recoil stabilization issue is definitely the Tavor, but we're not talking about the Tavor, we're talking about the Kilo. So you're definitely going to want to be a bit closer because this thing's going to kick a lot more. You don't have a magnified optic, so you can't really engage as long ranges. I do actually switch over to frangible. No, actually, I switch over to fully loaded because I'm not benefiting as much from sleight of hand. And you can see it happen in the gameplay. I don't know if it's already happened yet. I'm recording this in post. But in a way, there's an issue with this build, the Kilo's whole stealthy run-around build, and that's the M13 actually does it better, for one reason, and that's because the M13 has access to 300 blackout rounds, which don't leave enemy skulls, don't leave tracers, they're quieter, and you can combine that with a suppressor to become extremely stealthy. Pretty much you kill an enemy, outside of the noise, people won't be able to tell that you just killed an enemy. So in a way, as a stealth assault rifle, it's outclassed. However, don't think that this is a bad setup. This is a pretty damn good setup because of its ability to engage at close ranges really fast, and the Kilo by itself has already a great range value, increased even further, or at least the bullet velocity is increased even further by using the integrally suppressed barrel. So while I encourage you to engage at closer range due to the recoil, you can engage at longer ranges and definitely hit your targets fast due to that bullet velocity increase. So overall, it's a generalist weapon with a preference towards close range, and the long barrel AR-15 is a specialized weapon made for medium to long range.